The Venezuelan communications minister arrives at the head of the government delegation for talks with the opposition in Barbados. Bolivia is implementing an emergency plan to fight violence against women, which includes considering femicides as crimes against humanity. And former South African President Jacob Zuma begins a 5-day inquiry into allegations of corruption. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo. This is from the South. Today we begin in Barbados, where the Venezuelan government's delegation has returned to continue talks with the opposition. The head of the delegation and Minister of Communications, Jorge Rodriguez, made the announcement on Twitter.
Good morning. The delegation of the Bolivarian government of Venezuela has arrived back in the generous country of Barbados to continue the dialogue for peace with the different sectors of the Venezuelan opposition. We maintain what has been the guiding principle of President Nicolas Maduro, a permanent dialogue for peace, for peaceful coexistence, for the constitutional and democratic resolution of political and social differences. No more recourse to violence or to unconstitutional actions. We adhere to the words of Pope Francis, so that through dialogue we can resolve the difficulties and differences by peaceful means. We trust in the facilitating role of the government of Norway, and we thank the government and people of Barbados for their hospitality.
Our correspondent in Caracas, Leonel Retamal, has more.
In the last few minutes, we've learned from the Minister Jorge Rodriguez that the government delegation is back in Barbados. The delegation also includes the Governor of Miranda State, Hector Rodriguez, and the Foreign Minister, Jorge Arreaza. They are there to take part in a 4th round of talks, the second in Barbados, facilitated by the government of Norway. The minister said they were following the orientations of President Nicolas Maduro to seek a peaceful negotiated settlement of differences. Foreign Minister Arreaza also highlighted the declaration in support of Venezuela from the non-aligned movement in the light of the report on Venezuela presented by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet. The non-aligned movement rejected any attempt at intervention in Venezuela and promised to set up a mechanism to support the country. President Nicolas Maduro welcomed the declaration from the non-aligned movement, which will be meeting in Venezuela this week.
We thank Leonel Retamal for that report. We move to Guatemala now, where President Jimmy Morales canceled his planned meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump at the last minute due to widespread rejection to his plan for Guatemala to become a safe third country. A safe third country is a country that forces migrants to seek asylum within their borders, invalidating from doing so at their desired destination. Morales' decision to cancel his meeting comes after various appeals were made at the Constitutional Court to stop Guatemala from becoming a safe third country, on top of widespread rejection from across Guatemalan society. Meanwhile, the United States Department of Justice has announced new migration regulations said to disproportionately affect asylum seekers from Central America. The DOJ has published a new rule stating that asylum seekers who have passed through another country will not be able to apply for asylum at the U.S. border. It means that those who hazard the journey to the U.S. through Mexico from countries in Central America with legitimate asylum claims may be ineligible to make their case. While it's scheduled to go into effect on Tuesday, the regulation is expected to be challenged in the courts. On Sunday, communities across the United States came together to protect themselves from raids by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, commonly known as ICE. ICE began massive raids in 10 major cities across the country over the weekend, sparking a wave of solidarity as communities pulled together to offer safe spaces. The raids have been said to target newly settled migrant families, but advocacy groups and activists have been vigilant. They warned migrants not to open their doors to ICE if they don't have the right warrant, and suggested that all interactions with ICE agents be recorded. And ahead of the raids, the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, took the decision to permanently ban ICE from accessing police databases. Mayor Lightfoot added that police in the city would not cooperate with ICE to detain residents.
We have been spending today going to different neighborhoods to continue the effort to educate people about what their rights are. There's a tremendous amount of fear in our city. Our neighbors are worried about their status, worried as to whether or not the knock on the door is going to mean that ICE is coming for them. So what we're trying to do is lower the fear by giving them information, and the information is empowering them. What you see behind me are people who have been diligently working in their neighborhoods, community navigators, who are literally going door to door from business to business, educating people about what their rights are. I think people are grateful to have the information, but we still have a lot of work to be done.
Moving on, the Bolivian President Evo Morales has announced a 10-point emergency plan to fight violence against women. Among the different measures to protect women at risk, President Morales said the plan would push for femicides to be officially considered crimes against humanity. The president made the announcement surrounded by a number of ministers, lawmakers, and activists during a session of the Special Cabinet for Women. Morales said that the rate of femicides in Bolivia is highly worrying, and that the responsibility for eradicating it lies with both the government and society as a whole. Bolivia has the highest rate of femicides per capita in South America. Over 70 women have been killed due in gender-based violence in 2019 alone. We stay in Bolivia, where the government is planning to include a group of young people in its official delegation to the UN Climate Summit. The meeting, known as COP25, will take place in Chile in November.
These young people are part of a group of about 2,500 who are taking part in a climate change program run by the state ahead of the 2019 UN Climate Summit.
I have a lot of faith in young people that we can participate in this open discussion encouraged by the government. It's a policy we need to take advantage of. This is the right moment.
We are at risk. We need to take immediate action and start a change.
Similar forums are taking place in 9 Bolivian departments. The youth are taking responsibility.
There are structural causes to explain what kind of economy we have, how we make the transition, and which countries have more or less responsibility for taking action.
Climate change will have consequences in the long and medium term, and yet it's us, the future generations, who are most affected. So this is a very good initiative to involve us as young people.
This is an unprecedented initiative. The Bolivian government has decided not just to inform young people about the problem, but to include them in the official delegation that will defend the country's positions at the intergovernmental negotiations.
This hasn't happened yet in other countries. They are talking about how to include young people, but so far they have just been observers sitting in the back. This will be the first time they are actually part of a country's delegation.
It is not just about how many tons we emit. We need to know the science in depth, but we also need to understand what development models produce this problem on our planet.
The United Nations Framework Agreement is a treaty that sets out the basic obligations of the 196 participating states, plus the European Union, to combat climate change. In November, its next conference, known as COP25, will take place in Santiago, Chile, and the Bolivian delegation will include 5 young people.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Former South African President Jacob Zuma has appeared before an inquiry to answer corruption allegations. The accusations involve his relationship with the Govt family, which has been accused of influencing cabinet appointments and winning lucrative state contracts illegally. We have more in this report from our correspondent in Johannesburg, Matuba Malachi.
Some of those people one day will know They planned to murder me.
Perhaps the highlight of Jacob Zuma's testimony on Monday, the former president looked unfazed when he arrived at an inquiry where his name was mentioned several times. This is also an inquiry appointed by Zuma himself before he was forced to resign. The former president believes there's been a persistent conspiracy to oust him as leader of his political party and eventually as president. And now he says there have been attempts on his life.
I have survived attempts to kill me. People looking to poison me or being instructed by their handlers to do so.
Zuma went as far as naming not one but two of his own cabinet ministers as spies for the apartheid government. These are ministers who came before the commission to implicate the former president in alleged corruption.
The war today is fought at intelligence level, no longer at the hard guns, etc.
Zuma took most of the time making his submission to the commission, and there was little time for him to answer questions, and the inquiry was adjourned after close to 6 hours. The former president is expected to give testimony till Friday. Matuma Mahlachi, Telesur, Johannesburg.
2 health workers have been killed on duty in eastern Congo. According to the DRC Ministry of Health, the 2 community health workers engaged in Ebola prevention work in the North Kivu province when 2 unidentified men shot and killed them. They are reported to have been receiving death threats for months. The ministry said it is concerned with how violent attacks on health workers is hampering efforts to contain the Ebola pandemic. And also in the DRC, a person infected with the Ebola virus has been confirmed in Goma district. Goma is the first big city to be affected by the disease since its outbreak in the east of the country almost a year ago. The health ministry said health workers have been put on alert in the area to ensure that the virus does not spread quickly in the densely populated area close to the Rwandan border. The World Health Organization has urged people to exercise caution and not panic.
We will also boost surveillance measures at entry and exit points to ensure that neighbors, other provinces and neighboring Rwanda are also protected. Measures will also be taken to ensure that these checks are effective so that it doesn't spread.
Somalia is intensifying security after 26 people were killed in an attack on a hotel last week. The government of Somalia is on high alert and has mobilized security forces to increase surveillance in Kismayo, where the incident took place. The attack was the most severe since Allied forces dislodged Al-Shabaab from the port city 6 years ago. A group of armed assailants detonated a car bomb at the hotel before storming the facility and engaging security forces in a gun battle that lasted more than 10 hours.
I call on security forces to increase surveillance to prevent a repeat of this kind of terrorist attacks, especially now as we are heading towards elections. I also appeal to the public to provide relevant information to security forces to thwart potential threats to security.
United Nations Security Council delegates on a visit to Colombia have praised former FARC combatants for their commitment to the peace process despite concerns over the government's adherence to the agreement. Peace accords between the Colombian government and the then president Juan Manuel Santos and the FARC were signed in 2016 after negotiations in Norway and Cuba. However, the current president Iván Duque has sought to undermine the peace deal with up to 31% of the agreement yet to be implemented. At least 140 former FARC combatants have been murdered since the accords were signed. The Security Council is set to deliver its report later in July.
What I've seen is the sight of people who were fighting now in Congress, now settling their differences through talking. I've met ex-combatants who are trying to create a new life for themselves in the agriculture business, growing tomatoes, making a profit out of the land rather than fighting. And these are incredibly big achievements. So that seems to me the biggest thing. The fact of the agreement, the fact that people, whatever their differences, are still trying to make it work and are committed to making it work. And the fact that people have really laid down their weapons and are now engaging on a political level.
Another protest is beginning outside the governor's palace in Puerto Rico following revelations regarding Ricardo Rosselló's conduct in office. Support for the governor has plummeted since a report by the Investigative Journalist Center revealed the social media chats between high-ranking political figures administered by Rosselló engaged in homophobic, racist, and misogynistic discourse. Protesters have taken to the streets of the capital, San Juan, to demand the government's resignation. Allegations of corruption have also been leveled against Rosselló in recent weeks. Earlier, we spoke with Rafael Bernabe. He's the spokesperson for the Citizens Victory Movement, the political party that organized the demonstrations. He explained to us the significance of political anger in Puerto Rico.
Well, two things are new. One of them is that last Tuesday, the FBI arrested several former members of Rosselló's cabinet, in particular the former Secretary of Education, and accused her formally of acts of corruption. This is a person that the labor movement and many educators in Puerto Rico had struggled against for a long time, but the accusations have confirmed what people have been saying over many years. The second thing is that it was revealed that the governor over many months had this so-called private chat, an internet private chat with all of his cabinet members and collaborators and so on, and his consultants. And this document is devastating. It's full of racist, sexist comments, jokes about people who died during the Hurricane Maria, jokes about women, jokes about working people. There are elements of conspiracy to make sure that the students are able to frame the students and accuse them of violent acts and so on. So there are many things that came out in this chat. It's about a 100-page document full of really terrible stuff, and that has really brought out the anger of people. There's no word to describe it but anger, and people are really out on the street saying we don't want to be ruled. We don't want to be governed by somebody who has these type of ideas in their head. So they are demanding the resignation of the governor.
Moving on, in El Salvador, teenage rape survivor Evelyn Hernandez is facing a retrial after her 30-year prison sentence was annulled in an appeal at the Supreme Court in February. Hernandez, who is now 21, was convicted of murdering her child in 2017 and jailed for nearly 3 years after a stillbirth. The female judge at the time ruled that the teenager had induced an abortion, which has been a crime in El Salvador since 1997. Women's rights activists say that her retrial will serve as a test for the new president's position on abortion. To the Dominican Republic now, where people took to the streets at the weekend to protest against corruption and a proposed political reform. Daisy Toussaint reports.
Once again, the Green March brought out thousands of people to demand that the authorities put an end to corruption and impunity.
This is a civic movement to demand that they give back the money they have stolen and that they implement policies for quality education, healthcare, housing and jobs with respect for the environment.
The march is also demanding a cap on fuel prices and the protection of natural resources, and it opposes a constitutional reform that would allow the president to stand for re-election.
We say absolutely no to this spirit reform that will allow the re-election of President Danilo Medina, who clearly wants to perpetuate himself in power, that undermines the democratic rights of the Dominican people.
The demonstration, called the Green March of the Cibao, aimed to revive the civic protests that have been the hallmark of this movement.
The Dominican Republic is going through a major crisis, which is political, economic and cultural. The ruling Dominican Liberation Party is sinking this country. It has plunged us into debt. More than half our GDP now goes to pay the external debt, which had become the eternal debt.
The march brought together opposition leaders, students, social movements and civil society groups. The Green March says it will stay in the streets until it puts an end to corruption and impunity and prevents this constitutional reform that could give President Danilo Medina a third term in office.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Floods across India's north and northeastern regions have forced more than 3 million people from their homes. According to officials, the worst affected region is Bihar, where about 1.9 million people have fled due to rising waters. Monsoon season, which brings the most rain across South Asia, also hits Bangladesh hard, forcing about 190,000 people out of their homes. India's weather office has forecast widespread rains across Assam and Bihar for the next 2 days. And at least 14 people have been killed in northern India after a building collapsed. Following heavy rains, rescue workers using heavy machinery have been able to pull 28 survivors from the rubble. At least 11 people, including 7 children, have been killed in southern Afghanistan after their vehicle set off a landmine. 33 others have been left critically wounded. The victims were reportedly on their way to a shrine that houses the tomb of Sufi Sa Aga, a companion and relative of the Prophet Muhammad. After years of war, many roads in Afghanistan are strewn with landmines, which often kill children who curiously pick them up. In 2018 alone, over 1,000 civilians were victims of landmines and unexploded munitions. China has reiterated its displeasure with the planned United States arms sale to Taiwan. Beijing has promised to take firm action against U.S. companies that violate previously agreed arrangements between the two countries.
US arms sales are a severe violation of international law and norms. They severely violate the One China principle and the regulation of 3 Sino-US joint communiques. They harm China's sovereignty and national security. In order to protect national interests, China will sanction US companies that participate in selling weapons to Taiwan. China's government and Chinese companies will not cooperate or have commercial contacts with these US companies.
And today we end in Cuba, where the Guevara International Film Festival has come to an end. Let's take a closer look at how it showcased the unique work of filmmakers from around the world.
The Guevara Film Festival ended with the Best Film Showcase received the prestigious Lucia Award. Among those awarded was Puerto Rican actor Benicio del Toro, who received an honorary award for his many contributions to Latin American cinema.
I want to thank the people of Gibraltar for leading this festival and to all who work to make this beautiful dream a reality, the dream of Humberto Solás.
Over 50 films were in competition, coming from places as diverse as Germany, China, the United Kingdom, Canada, Spain, and Cuba. The Cuban-German collaboration El Viaje Extraordinario de Celeste García, directed by Arturo Infante, won in the category of Best Feature Film. Spanish actress María Isabel Díaz, who played the lead in the film, also won the award for Best Female Performance. The closing ceremony was held at the emblematic Jiva Movie Theater in Guevara's historic center. Here, Costa Rican director Ishtar Yacine Gutiérrez received the Best Director Award for her film Dos Fridas. Her film also won the award for Best Cinematography. It was based on the relationship between Mexican icon Frida Kahlo and her nurse. The Guevara Film Festival is not only an opportunity to showcase finished films, but there's a space for developing scripts and unfinished films to compete for funding. Festival director Jorge Perugorria also came out to thank everyone who made the festival possible and officially opened the submission process for next year's festival.
Thank you to all that have supported us during this difficult time for Cuba. I stand against the economic blockade imposed on our island.
Despite the 50-year-old U.S. blockade on Cuba, this competition continues, showcasing the best films from Cuba and from around the world.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Stefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.